Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to our first official keynote for the Global Education Conference. We had a There are some conference reminders. This is a new slide. We do have a chat room at the front of the website. So if you go to globaleducationconference.com and you have any questions, you can actually put them in the chat, and there's a lot of good feedback going on there. The Twitter hashtag is GlobalEd13. There's a survey at the projects we launched this morning. Thanks to our conference sponsors, IRN and Global Campaign for Education. The event. So this is a chance for those of you who are in the session room now to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the whiteboard. You're looking for the star icon. It's the second one down, and then you click on the map and then put your location in the chat. Just want to hear time and temperature as well. So, Michael, I'm still waiting for that keynote file.
Yeah, it's about 72 megabytes. Unfortunately, I'm just trying to see this. Got lots of pictures. I might go with the screen. Is it okay if I go the screen share route?
Yeah, it will just be a lesser experience, especially for those with bandwidth. Can you export it as image files?
Yeah, will that work better?
It works great. So if you export it as image files, then I'll give you the trick to importing image files.
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so you go to Load Content, go to the folder that has the image files, and import the first 9 images as a group import.
Okay. Yeah.
And then go to the last one, go to image, the 9th image, and then upload the rest of the images as a bulk.
And go to load content again from here?
Correct. So you're in the 9th image, and bulk load all of the rest of the folder files in order.
Got it. So everyone gets to witness this live tech support. Thanks, Steve. Well, that sure worked a lot better. I don't know, PowerPoint is not happy, but everything is there now. So that's perfect.
To take us back to that first slide now, you'll notice that people are going to be downloading that slide deck. You'll see next to their names a little pencil with 2 yellow dots. So for the first few slides, just be aware they may not be seeing exactly what you've seen if it hasn't loaded for them, but they should catch up pretty quick.
Awesome.
You're on.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, and hello, Julene, too. As Julene mentioned, I think Steve mentioned, I just got back from a week in the Arctic, which was amazing, working with the program that Julene actually sits on the advisory board for, the Polar Bears International Arctic Connections Program. So I apologize for a little bit of a technical glitch, but my computer was definitely enjoyed that experience in the Arctic, but its keyboard and mouse seem not to have been as resilient as I might have been hoping. But I'm super thrilled and honored that Steve and Lucy have invited me today to share some of our work with you and a little bit of a look at one of the latest programs we've launched, which is actually the result of the last 2 years of my studies at the Ontario College of Art and Design, where I just completed a master's in inclusive design with a focus on education and learning. And my thinking was really about how can we leverage the internet and technology and global education to create more inclusive, more engaging learning experiences for students around the world. So I'll share a bit of my own journey for the last couple of decades for those of you who haven't heard of me or Taking It Global before, and then I'll also share a bit about future-friendly schools and these 3 focus areas for us: global citizenship, environmental stewardship, and student voice, which I think really cross-connect with almost everything we're talking about this week at Global EdCon. Thank you, and thanks for the link there, Lucy. So my story begins in 1985. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Commodore 64, which is still almost, I think, only recently surpassed, I think, by the iPad as the best-selling computing device of all time. And for me, it was only 2.5 years old, Christmas 1985, when my parents bought the Commodore 64. And I'm sure we have some Commodore 64 users, people who remember the Commodore in the room. We can use the hands raised option, or people can share their fond memories. But as you can see, the computer and disk drive and everything was quite substantial in terms of the space it took up. So thanks for those pings for the Commodore 64. And of course today, that trend is really continuing. I think I was one of only 2 or 3 people in my class who was lucky enough to experience the Commodore. But you can see my little one, John Paul, who's 18 months now. He doesn't get a lot of screen time, but he loves looking at himself on the computer and FaceTiming with mom and dad when they're traveling. And of course, today, compared to almost 30 years ago, many more young people are having access to technology at a much younger age. And I think what we're trying to figure out and contribute to is ensuring that as they do that, they have compelling learning experiences that prepare them to be global citizens. That's what our work at Taking It Global is all about. But in terms of how I got there, how I got to thinking about this kind of global education space and launching a nonprofit that works in it, it really began with a keen sense of entrepreneurship. Starting my first business, I think, was a nature sale at the age of 4 or 5, learning about being able to sell different products or services to make money. And the first thing I sold, in my first business ever, was the flowers out of my mom's garden. We set up a nature sale with my uncle, who was always up for trouble, and learned a lot about the concept of sustainability, because that first day I might have sold out of everything I had, but the next day there was nothing left. So that kind of very early experience with entrepreneurship got me thinking about what kind of products or services I could design or sell. And it quickly turned into a specific goal. This was around the time, I think I was probably in grade 4 or 5, when the modem was invented, or the modem became commonplace. And I remember wanting to buy a modem so that I could communicate and chat with my friend, Sean, who also had a Commodore 64. The problem was the modem was about $600 or $700 back then, and my paper route, my first job delivering papers to the Etobicoke Guardian, only paid about $40 a month. So using my math skills, I realized it was going to take quite a while to earn enough for the paper. And at that time, I was at, I think, a Kmart store, learning about all the different software you could buy. And I realized, well, my friend and I, Sean, we had learned basic programming. Why couldn't we create some kind of a software program for people to buy? And I was a big baseball card fan. We got to see both Toronto Blue Jays World Series in the 90s, and always had cards around the house. So I thought, well, as my first business, why don't I create a piece of software using BASIC that would let people organize and catalog their sports cards? I didn't know anything about market research or figuring out if people would actually want to buy this. And so I went all over the city of Toronto, posting up these flyers and ads for our company, and not one person ever called to buy our software. So I was a bit disappointed back then, but I found a great quote from Thomas Edison that I share with a lot of young entrepreneurs today. We work with a lot of young social entrepreneurs, which is, I haven't failed, I found 10,000 ways that don't work. And I think that experience, that early failure, really gave a lot of new insight for us in terms of being able to be better prepared and researching and learning more about the products and services we want to develop in the future. But this was back in grade 5 or 6. I obviously wasn't as optimistic about it back then. But we were lucky that our parents each bought us our own modem anyways. And that really introduced me to the beginning of online community, these bulletin board systems. I think I started my own bulletin board in grade 7 or 8. And I think one of my first birthday presents was my own phone line, because my parents were sick of hearing the modem screeching at each other when they picked up the phone. And we quickly discovered this amazing World Wide Web. My friend's dad had a small business and made the mistake of giving us his Visa card, along with this AOL CD that came in the mail, and asking us to figure out a place for him to promote his business. And we didn't really figure that out, but we discovered this amazing World Wide Web of people in places all over the world, in chat rooms, helping each other learn how to build websites. And in particular, in grade 8, I did a presentation in media class. It had to be on a different form of advertising, television, newspaper, radio, something like that. And our teacher basically said, well, you can choose anything. And I had just heard of this company that was started by 2 students down in California called Yahoo. And this new idea they had was to sell images and pictures on web pages as advertising to companies. And I thought, well, if these guys down in California can do it, they're in university, but I'm sure we can figure out how to do the same thing. And so I launched my first website in 1996. It was called The Internet Exposed. And through working in chat rooms and meeting others, and a mentorship from an author named Don Tapscott, who wrote Growing Up Digital in 1997, I spoke a lot to Don, and he agreed to be one of my first mentors. And his book was all about how young people as part of this net generation, which he kind of categorized as anyone born after 1980, 81, who'd been kind of growing up with the personal computing revolution. One of the big pieces of advice he gave me for my little website with my friends was, well, if you can find other people to collaborate with and build on your project with, you can be a lot more successful. And so I was up late one night in a chat room, and I met someone named Swoosh on Internet Relay Chat back then. And Swoosh ended up being a young person named Michael Heyman in Brisbane, Australia. I'm sure we might even have some early birds from Australia joining us today. And we decided through collaboration to really merge our websites together. And with a team of about 30 others around the world, most of us just high school students, we ended up building one of the world's largest sites about computers and the Internet. It's called mydesktop.com. And by 1999, we had over 1 million people reading over 7 million pages of articles about computers and technology. And they had no idea, I think, that it was all written by mostly high school students. And in fact, I think that's part of what made our site so easy to understand and read and learn about. But we faced a bit of a challenge. We had a bit of a tough time getting venture capitalists to take us seriously. I was only in grade 12 by then. My business partner, Michael from Australia, was just graduated high school and came to Canada. But we didn't know anything about work visas or incorporation. They didn't really teach those kinds of things in school. And so, we ended up getting laughed out of the office of most of the venture capitalists we went to and talked to. And so we made the tricky decision in 1999, although it ended up being a good one in terms of timing of the big collapse in the stock market, to sell our company, mydesktop.com, to a company down in New York City. It wasn't for a lot, definitely not in the tens or hundreds of millions, but enough spread between the team of about 30 of us that we could all, think of a new idea and work on collaborating on our next big project. And what I didn't really expect was the media attention. We were invited to speak at conferences all over the world. I spoke at a conference down in Boca Raton called the Business Council, where I got to meet Bill Gates, who was always a big hero for me and, helped me be less embarrassed because my mother was there. He was saying, he also had to hire someone to drive his rental car when he was starting Microsoft. But also got featured in quite a lot of media. I was asked to be on a television show called Oprah. And I never watched Oprah as a kid. I think I would have been a lot more nervous if I knew how many people around the world watched the show. And that same year, I was also named by Teen People magazine, this is making me feel quite old now, just turned 31, as one of the 20 teens that will change the world, along with people like Beyonce and sports stars and singers and celebrities. I was the only one of those 20 teens that will change the world outside the United States. I'm based here in Toronto in Canada. And so it was a lot of pressure. It was people, all over the world emailing me and asking for my help, mentorship. Thanks for all the Toronto and Canada shout-outs. But so I really realized that there was a big gap. So many people had ideas and projects they wanted to start, and they didn't really have the support that I was lucky to have from both my guidance counselor, who ended up giving me school credits part-time for working on my projects when I was in high school, my principal, but also to my parents, who probably accepted less grades that were a bit lower than I probably would have had if I was entirely focused on school. And so I started looking, I was getting thousands of emails, probably close to 5,000 at some point. And I was trying to figure out there must be some place on the Internet to send these people to, young people that wanted to take action, that had project ideas. How could we actually help them launch their ideas? And that's when I was actually having a brainstorm with a friend of mine named Jennifer. She was running a program called Girls Are IT, funded by IBM back at the time. And she was actually using social issues as a way to engage young women in building their technology skills and teaching them how to build websites and all kinds of different projects. And I was kind of chatting about, how was I going to help these thousands of people? All the websites that I found out there for teens were focused on cosmetics, celebrities, dating, fashion. There wasn't really a place out there for positive learning and action. And that's when we kind of had this brainstorm at a reunion of a summer program where many of us had worked together. And we came up with this vision of creating what we thought of as a social network for social good. And you can see our name is TakingITGlobal, and in the top left, the tagline was inspire, inform, and involve. So our goal was really to explore how we could create an informal learning environment as a complement to the education system that would help all these young people who had different ideas for creating positive change in their communities or starting a social enterprise. How could we network and link them all together? Because there were so many different investments being made all around the world, and there still are today, in terms of wiring communities, bringing the Internet to community centers, to schools, here in Canada, to libraries, and even every post office. But what was being done to actually create some kind of a community and a context between all these people with access? there wasn't really anything like it. So that was our vision for Taking It Global, creating this informal learning community that would be a social network for social good, that would connect together young people all over the world who are getting access to the internet who wanted to do something more with it. And our mission is to empower young people to understand and act on the world's greatest challenges. So that's really living out the Inspire, Inform, Involve tagline. And really, I think where we see a strong partnership with educators in schools like you, because I think schools do a tremendous job of getting students inspired and informed, and we see a really strong partnership in helping to provide opportunities that help students get involved and take action to address these issues. And I'll share some of the opportunities we've created since then. So since we launched the site, today it's about 13 years ago, 13 years and a month since we launched, we've had over 40 million young people use the site and contribute over 1 million resources, projects, and ideas. So it's a very user-driven site and community. All of these resources have been created by educators, by students, in partnership with amazing NGOs and groups ranging from people like IRON to universities all around the world. So it's really been a collaboration. It's also translated into 13 languages. So when we first launched, of course, the Canadian government said it'd be great if you had the website in French, and we said, well, why not create a platform that allows for crowdsourced translation? And this was almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. So we beta tested some of the technologies, the database platform and things like that back at the time had barely supported some of these character sets. So Lucy, I think, Lucy, we can make you an honorary Canadian. And so we have a system where we have over 300 volunteers that, through our website, have actually helped to translate the site into languages like French and Spanish, but also Arabic, Russian, most recently Swahili, and really make it a globally accessible community. We think that's so important because as of, I think, about 2009, the majority of new internet users coming online for the first time no longer speak English as their first language. So we really want to create more engagement, more opportunities for content in multiple languages. And Russian and Arabic and Chinese are some of our most popular languages now, alongside English. So there's definitely a huge demand for content in many of these languages. So in terms of the challenges, what we're trying to tackle through our programs, I wanted to share some of that in the context of a few different pieces of research. One is a study that's done about once every decade by one of the world's largest ad agencies called BBDO. And they survey young people in over 50 countries around the world. And what they found in the last iteration of the study was that only 14% of young people felt like the world was becoming a better place. And in fact, they were more optimistic in the developing world and even less optimistic, only 2%. When people are talking about speaking French, only 2% of people in France feel like the world is becoming a better place. So there's a huge disconnect, I think, between the developing and developed world in terms of feeling hopeful and feeling like things are getting better, but also in terms of people feeling like they can contribute and take action towards making the world a better place. And this also links, I think, to job satisfaction. There's been, I think it was a great study that came out just yesterday. I was reading a press release this morning from Monster.com that said that something like only a third of people actually feel satisfied in their jobs and feel motivated to do them. So connecting what people are doing in their workplace with the ability to contribute to some of these issues is also pretty important. So we try to address that hope challenge through our pathway to action. It begins with telling stories. And so we've got amazing stories of hundreds of young people who've taken positive action in classrooms all around the world. Some of them are members of our own site. Others are educators who come from networks like IRON or Global SchoolNet, who've told their stories through our site, really just trying to inspire youth and educators about what's possible. And then we really want to make that action accessible. We want people to understand that it doesn't have to be starting your own nonprofit organization, but you can actually take everyday actions to make the world a better place. And so to help explain that, we launched a section called Commit to a Better World that showcases hundreds of different actions people can take in their day-to-day lives. And then we realized that it wasn't working very well. It was a bit awkward to ask people to come onto the internet and check in and say, okay, I used a reusable mug today. And so what we did is we launched a mobile app, which initially was for iOS, and we just relaunched it, to show you a little glimpse here, in HTML5 so that any smartphone platform can use it. And Commit to Act lets you understand the dozens of actions that you can take on a day-to-day basis to reduce your impact on the world, on the planet, especially around the environment. And the next area we're expanding this into is health, looking at how we can encourage more healthy behaviors. And so this is something that you can also explore in your classroom. You can create your own classroom code and have classrooms within your school where schools compete against each other and have friendly competition around some of these positive actions. We also have the ability to share these actions on social networks. And we have a huge amount of traction in terms of, for every person who shares their action, there's something like 26 or 27 people that come back and actually learn about that action through your social network. So sharing through these networks is incredibly powerful in terms of sharing these messages with your friends. And last week with PBI on the Arctic tundra with polar bears outside, we were talking to people about how some of these actions, like reducing the amount of meat they eat, for example, can make a huge difference in actually protecting the climate. Something like a quarter of water used in the United States is used to grow grain for livestock, and I think more than 70% of the grain in the U.S. is used to feed livestock as well. So, for example, not stopping to eat meat has a much higher impact on the environment than using a hybrid car. So there's some great access to really tangible actions people can take through some of these apps that we try to make accessible. And they're more likely to actually use these technology tools for civic activities. There's a great study from Pew that talks about a number of the different civic behaviors and social activities the young people are willing to do and take. And in fact, it reminds me of a study I saw almost a decade ago when we were starting Taking It Global from Roper. And it showed that the peak of interest in many of these social issues actually happens around grade 7 and 8. And so we have this huge opportunity, especially in the middle school years, to engage young people in some of these issues. And we need to do more to actually make it actionable for them and to make them feel hopeful that action can actually add up. I remember being in middle school and going on my first trip to the west coast of Vancouver and coming back and wanting to start a club that I heard about there. It was called Kids Can Save the Planet. And my friend said, well, we can clean up the yard of our school, but we can't really make a difference in the whole planet. And I think the amazing thing we have access to today is this worldwide network, many networks, ones that we've created and others, where you can actually feel part of a movement making a difference more than ever before. So it gives me hope that we can actually link a lot of this into the curriculum. We had some amazing science teachers last week bringing their students to our webinars to learn about the science of climate change, but also action at the same time. And speaking of action, this kind of pathway to action culminates in a free resource we created called our Guide to Action, which is published in Creative Commons format. So we have a Guide to Action for any type of clubs and projects. We have a Climate Change Guide to Action, an HIV/AIDS Guide to Action, Online Volunteering Guide to Action, and most recently, a Mental Health Guide to Action that really looks at mental health issues in schools, addresses issues like cyberbullying. And so these are downloadable principal workbooks that help students start projects in their classrooms or their communities that actually make a difference and are sustainable. The last step here, you can probably barely make out on the screen, is have a lasting impact. And so I would love for your feedback on these guides. They're completely free for teachers to use and reuse. And we're also excited about our partnerships with educational publishers like Pearson in the United States and McGraw-Hill up here in Canada. We're working with them to redesign the grade 9 and grade 10 civics textbooks to incorporate a lot more action. So we're really excited about bringing more action to the classroom. And for me, that was a big part of my journey. I had an opportunity in 2001 to travel and speak at a technology and education conference in Accra in Ghana. We were invited by some young people there. And that really got me inspired and had me reflect quite a lot on the privilege I had that I didn't even realize. It made me think a little bit more about education, how we could bring that experience of poverty that I experienced firsthand and that gave me a new perspective living in a village for a week with those people, with our hosts. It made me realize and appreciate things in a different way. And so it kind of led me to this quote. I read the Partnership for 21st Century Skills report almost a decade ago where they said, today's education faces irrelevance unless we bridge the gap between how students live and how they learn. And it really led me to think, who can we partner with? How can we develop programs that actually support not just informal learning of young people, but help educators create global collaborations that actually bring many of these issues into classrooms and help students do firsthand learning and experience, and understand and then want to work to address these issues. So it led us to launch a contest called Take Your Classroom Global with Microsoft and ISTE, where we collected stories of many amazing educators, many who were involved in other networks like IRON, and many who were taking action on their own. And we turned those stories, those contest submissions, into a best practices publication that we then shared and published online. And it's still available to actually help to scale those practices. So interviewing those educators, sharing their stories, and really trying to inspire a broader sense of global education and global collaboration. And you can imagine 10 years ago, a lot of these concepts are very new. Most of our grant applications were rejected. And so it's amazing. I'm thrilled to have met Steve and Lucy and to see the momentum behind the conference this year and for the last few years and behind global collaboration in general, because it's been a dream of ours for over a decade now to have more of this kind of education coming into classrooms. And I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to partner with all of you to hopefully find some of our resources useful to do that. And the pathway to action culminates with a program that we call Sprout. This was actually supported by the Pearson Foundation. And what happened was people got to the end of the guide to action. They emailed us and said, I'm a student from a high school. I have this project. I want to launch it. Can you help me get my project off the ground? And so with the support of Pearson, we created two things, both a facilitated e-course that runs several times a year and a free self-guided e-course for students called Sprout Self that helps them take their ideas for social change projects and actually turn them into a plan that's actionable that they can fundraise for. We also created something called the Pearson Fellowship for Social Innovation. And over the last 2 years, Pearson's given away over 24 grants and mentorship matches for young people who graduated the Sprout course to actually get the support to launch their projects and initiatives. And we had one of them, for example, part of an initiative from Global Giving and Microsoft called Give for Youth, called Made in India. It was a student in India who wanted to help provide education to his domestic worker, but also to domestic workers and maids in his city to help them organize themselves, to advocate for better conditions and resources and even access to healthcare. And he raised over $10,000 to be able to reach several hundred healthcare workers now in the region. So many amazing projects. But we know that we're not alone. We're not the only nonprofit organization working with young people, working with educators to do these kinds of projects. And that's why we created a coalition called Youth Movements, which partners together over 30 nonprofits working with young people around the world and encourages them to share their data, to share their good practices. And very most recently, we've launched a mobile app to help those projects that are supported by many foundations actually report on their impact using tools like Instagram and YouTube. So really trying to help tell stories and share practices amongst youth and youth-serving organizations so that we're not all just working in our own silos and duplicating efforts, but that we create more collaboration. And so if any of you are aware of or run different organizations or after-school projects and you'd like to share your resources and data, we'd love to hear from you. Most recently, we partnered with the International Baccalaureate, the IB, around their student conferences. They had 3 this past summer, and we had students who were attending their conferences around the world upload their projects to this platform to be able to share them and collaborate with others. So Em is asking nonprofit. So TakingItGlobal is a nonprofit, and you might have missed the beginning of the story, which is that I had a few different web startups before launching TakingItGlobal, and one of them we sold and became pretty successful. And I ended up investing a bunch of those funds into launching TakingItGlobal as a charity, mostly because our early grant proposals got rejected, and it wasn't quite as easy to fundraise for a charity as I thought. I was excited to not have to deal with venture capitalists, but it turns out fundraising for a charity is pretty challenging too. So the understanding challenge is a great piece of data that revises what National Geographic has been looking at for the last 5 or 6 years. There's a great nonprofit called World Savvy that does a lot of great global citizenship and global competency work. And they did a study last year that called their Global Competency Survey of high school graduates in the United States. They had several pieces of data. They looked at whether people could find where certain places were located. So 72% of students didn't know where Afghanistan was located. But more importantly, they asked students what they thought about global education. 74% of students said they wish their courses were more global. 83% say they believe diversity is an asset, and 80% are curious about world events. So it's not that they're intentionally ignorant about the world, but I think the way that we're exposing them, the way that we're connecting them to these people and places could be richer. And that's really what we try to get at and do at TakingItGlobal. So we're really trying to connect people, connect students to real young people in those places. And Lisa, sorry you have to go, but I hope you'll be able to watch the recording. So one way that we do that is through our partnership with Pearson. They have a geography and history textbook many of you might have heard of called My World Geography and My World History for middle schoolers. And we run the digital resource called My World TigEd, which gives students who are reading those textbooks access to real-world stories of young people from our network, from countries around the world, as a complement to their use of the My World textbook. We also run what's called the Global Gallery. It's a collection of over 20,000 pieces of student artwork that was inspired by a young artist that came up to us at a conference in 2004, 2005 and said, hey, your website's great, but what about young artists? How can we create a platform to share culture through art? And so a big part of what we're trying to do is to provide a showcase of that. We are very lucky to have support from HP, Hewlett-Packard, who gave us a donation of digital cameras and scanners in our early days that we could send all over the world so that young people in some of these regions could act as ambassadors and bring some of this amazing artwork on the web. And we're constantly running contests and opportunities. This is a winner, a piece of artwork from Taiwan that won a climate change contest we ran in partnership with Staples. This was a grade 7 student who won with this amazing piece of art. We also launched a section called Global Issues, inspired by an 8th grade teacher named Sue Rollith in Scarborough here on the east end of Toronto. She wanted her students to have a Global Issues film festival. And they used our website as a resource, and she called us up one day and said, your site is really inspiring and great, but it'd be great if there was an easier way for our students to find all of the different content on one issue in one place. And so she helped us sketch out the design for a section that would essentially bring together primary source content, facts and statistics for students to use as research, with student-created content, petitions, artwork, blogs, different resources, and then also lesson plans for educators in one place. And these sections, this is Global Issues section, is now the #1 most trafficked section of our website. So it really was amazing to have that feedback. And most of what I'm sharing with you is inspired by an educator or a young person who wrote to us and said, it'd be really cool if you could share this with us, could make this accessible to us in a different way. So we've constantly learned from that. And one of the people I've learned quite a lot from is Dr. Seymour Papert and his book, The Children's Machine, Rethinking School in the Age of the Computer. And this kind of reaffirmed some of our thinking about how we could bring our content into classrooms, how we could support more educators in using it. And one of my first conferences that I ever spoke at, I was invited by a dear friend, Bruce Dixon, from the Anytime Anywhere Learning Foundation to speak in Australia. And I remember many of my feedback forms had the word crikey. And so we realized that was actually a good thing, and that people were excited about the opportunity that these resources presented in their classroom, and really got us thinking and doing a little more research on how this could positively support educators and some of the changes happening in classrooms. And then I did some research, and some of the data I found, for example, was this study from the U.S. Department of Education, Students in Today's Schools. And this is an engagement study they started doing in 1983, where they asked graduating grade 12 students whether they found their schoolwork meaningful, whether they thought their courses were interesting, and whether they thought what they learned in school would be important later in life. And you can see ever since the advent of the Commodore 64, these numbers have not been going in a good direction. And I think it really speaks to the lack of investment from our political leadership in both educators and equipment and resources for schools. And I know in Canada, we're definitely in a better situation in many cases than in the U.S., but in most of the schools I visit here in Toronto, it still looks very similar to what I had when I was in high school a decade ago. A couple computers in our classroom, and we're lucky, we have an increased investment in laptop carts. We're still not at the point where I think we have the resources and, more importantly, the professional learning that teachers deserve to be able to do them, to make the most of these, the opportunity of global collaboration and technology. And I know many of you are on the forefront of this and leading this, but I think my question and my challenge for my 18-month-old who will be going into the school system in a few years is how can we spread this and make sure every educator is involved in professional learning opportunities like this one. Another more recent stat from Pearson My Voice, a study they did in 2011 of more than 50,000 high school students, 46% of them said they find school boring. And even here in Canada, the Canadian Education Association did a study they released last year called What Did You Do in School Today? And by grade 12, there's a drop from 82% to 45% of students that feel intellectually engaged. So I think there's something missing. There's something we could be doing to connect them, to connect students and learning to real-world issues and problems that would help to address this gap. And that's why in 2006 we launched TigEd, or Taking It Global for Educators. And our broad goal is to really provide that support to educators that they need to bring global issues into the classroom, and really with a focus in 3 different core value areas. The first is preparing students for global citizenship. And we think that's important because back in that same World Savvy study, only 12% of students say they received instruction that actually helped them understand the roots of global issues. So they care about the world, but they really don't feel like they're having the opportunities to prepare for it. And Ryan and others, I had the opportunity to speak at TED in 2001, and that was, I think, a year or 2 before they started doing the recording. So I would definitely be honored to participate in some of your TEDx meetings and sessions, but unfortunately the TED Talk we did where we launched Taking It Global isn't online yet. I don't know if they'll be able to dig that out of their archives at some point, but I don't think they had recorded it yet. So in terms of global citizenship, almost everything we do supports it, but one great example is a game called Haiti, The Cost of Life. This was created by Global Kids in partnership with Game Lab, and we helped to develop the educational platform for it. This is a game very similar to The Sims, where students can choose a goal of health, happiness, education, or money. And they basically have to try to survive through 4 years of growing seasons in Haiti. And they come with all kinds of different, they get thrown all kinds of different circumstances. And they basically learn through a bunch of teacher's guides and lesson plans we have, or their own independent playing of it, about the kind of sacrifices that people need to make to survive. Not all the kids can go to school, and sometimes the best job that brings in the money you need to survive isn't the healthiest one for you. So this has now been played over 2 million times through our site, and we've got about a half dozen other educational games as well, but this is one of my favorite examples because it kind of speaks to my experience in Ghana. I came back with a new appreciation of of hot water and a comfortable bed and so many other things that I hadn't expected. And really realizing, though, at the same time that people there were so happy and optimistic about the access they did have, yet in our context it was so little. And so this kind of goes a small way towards, I think, simulating some of that realization. That's great. It's exciting that your class played the game. I hope they enjoyed it. The second focus area is encouraging student voice and really trying to support student voice in learning in many different dimensions. One part of that was helping to support the development of an initiative by our provincial government here in Ontario called Speak Up. They've done some great work on supporting student voice projects, and part of that includes a grants program where students in any high school across the province can submit a proposal to improve something about their school and receive a grant. And they've given away over 2,000 grants in the last few years. So creating support for student ideas, whether that's within your school, within your district. Here in Ontario, it's mandatory to have a student trustee. So those are key important things. But it's also student voice within what and how students are learning. A great example is Generation Yes, the program run by Dennis Harper in the United States. It's genyes.org. Yes stands for Youth and Educators Succeeding. And Gen Yes is all about getting students to partner with educators in designing technology integration in classrooms, which is a great example of student voice in terms of co-designing learning experiences. Building professional learning, so a big part of our focus too with the Toronto District School Board in this last year has been building a really unique professional learning program with student voice as one of the focuses, and then students have come back and presented to their family of schools in their region about some of the projects they've created. So giving them an opportunity to partner with their educators in developing those projects is something that I'm thrilled to be bringing here to my hometown as well. And then on a global level, we've partnered with Cisco and Promethean on a dialogue called Education Fast Forward. The dialogue is actually happening this Thursday with two experts speaking about new pedagogies for learning. Kristen Weatherby is one of the speakers as well, and it's something you can tune into for free online. And this conversation, this January, we actually brought a number of students together from about 20 different countries using Cisco's telepresence technology with a conference of ministers of education from around the world. And these students were able to share their thoughts and reflections on the future of learning with over 100 ministers of education and ministry staff. So we're also trying to create more dialogue on the future of learning with partners like ISTE. In 2006, we had a great partnership with them, but also on a global level with ministers of education. And the third focus area is fostering environmental stewardship. We think this is really worth calling out separately from global citizenship because of the massive changes happening with our climate. I got to experience some of that firsthand last week. The polar bears now have to wait almost a month longer than they used to 30 years ago to be able to go onto the ice and to eat. So they're hungrier than they ever were, and that's leading to some unwanted encounters with humans in some cases as well. But also I think there's more action that we can take, and it's more accessible than ever before through some of the programs like Commit to Act that I shared with you. One great resource is a program called Tread Lightly that we created with sponsorship from Staples. It's in 5 different languages, and it's a whole series of lesson plans and teacher's guides to help students understand what their ecological footprint is and then the many different actions they can take as a classroom to address it. One great example of an action is low carbon lunch. LOW stands for local, organic, and waste-free. This is a very easy program you can implement maybe one day a week in your cafeteria just to build awareness about the impact that food makes on the environment, and there's dozens of other examples through Tread Lightly as well. The second program I wanted to share is called Deforest Action. This was started by a network of schools in Asia, and Chris Gauthier, who's one of the leading educators in organizing it, was actually the closing keynote speaker at ISTE last year and also gave a session this year. And Deforest Action is kind of a multifaceted education program where students are learning about the causes behind deforestation, in many cases illegal deforestation in places like Borneo. They're taking political action to organize against it. So for example, in Australia and New Zealand, they've got the governments to consider truth in labeling bills so that palm oil has to be disclosed on certain products. They've written letters to companies. There's an amazing video from a primary school where they sent a letter to the CEO of Arnott's, the company that makes Tim Tams, and Arnott's has agreed by 2015 to use only sustainable palm oil in their products. But they've also raised funding. They've now raised over $100,000 for projects happening in Borneo, and they've recruited a whole network of action agents, young people that actually travel to Borneo to conduct projects, to learn more about what's going on, to report back to the students. And there's a movie called The Rise of the Eco-Warriors. They call these action agents Eco-Warriors that will be coming out next year to tell this story. And the students actually voted and selected which students would be representing them in Borneo. So they've had a number of video conferences, and there's now a cycle of activity happening. There's actually an online course launching this month as part of the HP Catalyst Academy by Chris Gauthier, who's the educator. I'll just at the URL here, that you can take for free. So it's a MOOC, and it helps you bring the Deforest Action Program in your classroom, specifically the Earth Watchers element of it. And Earth Watchers is a program that was created by ESRI and Geodan that actually gives students the opportunity to learn all about geography and mapping by getting a piece of land designated to them in Borneo. And on a weekly basis, we have satellite data being donated so that the students can monitor and report on potential illegal deforestation happening on their part of land. So along with learning about some of these math and science concepts, they have the opportunity to contribute to real-world reporting on deforestation. And in many cases, these small communities just can't keep track of what's going on. They don't have, their satellite data is tens of thousands of dollars a month. So we're thrilled to have been able to put this real-world element behind an education program like this. And so that's a little bit of a look at Taking It Global. To get, I know it's a bit of a whirlwind of information. I'm kind of compressing 14 years in 45 minutes here for you. But one of the things, the kind of culmination of a lot of this work has been thinking about how we can bring some of these ideas and programs and these three values I've just shared to scale for more schools around the world. We're really honored to have Deloitte spend some time pro bono volunteering with us last year and helping us think through that. And one of the ideas that emerged through working with some of our educator advisory board and some of our team here was the creation of a standard. What if we could create a certification or an award that was given out to schools that had exemplary behavior, exemplary activity in these three areas? We really felt like that could help to encourage people to rise up and get involved and really raise the profile of all of these types of programs and activities amongst the community of our schools, the schools that are already engaged, but also to raise awareness with other schools that aren't yet maybe aware of the importance of some of these values and some of the research that I just shared behind them. So just to share quickly what I did, how I did that, this was kind of the culminating project of my master's degree. I decided, well, we're not experts. You know, who are we to say we know how to measure and what the indicators are of these things in schools? Really, the best people to decide are educators and schools themselves. So we launched a participatory indicator design process where we had over 4,500 people submit votes and their own ideas for what indicators would look like across these three value areas of global citizenship, environmental stewardship, and student voice. We ended up having people from 157 countries, 89 countries with more than 5 people participating, give ideas, and over 140 new ideas for indicators submitted. And I think one of the greatest pieces of evidence of the success of the process was that out of all these indicators and ideas submitted, we distilled them down into 5 principles for each of the areas. And 11 of the top 15 ideas that made it as principles were actually not our ideas. They were submitted by other stakeholders. So I'm excited this truly was kind of a participatorily designed program and process. And so those principles for global citizenship are community engagement, global learning, professional learning, school culture, and school partnerships. For student voice, they're learning environment, school culture, school policy, student leadership, and student-centered learning. And for environmental stewardship, their connections to community, health and well-being, interdisciplinary work, policies and practices, and the outdoors. And the real goal of the certification, I think what makes this program different and what we're really hoping to achieve is it's not kind of a closed garden where only the people who participate have access. We want to turn each one of those values and each one of those principles into kind of a living laboratory of examples. So you can go on the Future Friendly Schools website right now at futurefriendlyschools.org. You can click on one of those 3 values, and you can see probably for each of them almost a dozen stories and examples from schools of programs that they've implemented that address these principles. And even when schools participate, so we've just launched this program where this is the first school year where schools can join and participate, and we'd love to have you join us. Each school will have a publicly facing portfolio that will showcase all of the evidence they've submitted on this pathway. So you'll have to submit at least one piece of evidence for all of those principles. And so at the end of the day, all that evidence will be submitted through Creative Commons, and we're hoping to create a community that's building on and learning from and sharing practices with each other in all of these areas and constantly learning from each other and evolving the standards and evolving the indicators as a community. So I'm really excited about this kind of program. It was a great way to combine my kind of studies with my vision for growing the impact of the work we're all doing around the world. I'm certain that any program and any project being presented at this week's Global Education Conference will fit into one of these principles, one of these program areas, and I'd love to work with all of you in making this relevant and connect to and to really link it even to your programs and projects and to share your stories through the initiative and through the process. So that's Future Friendly Schools. And to end, I'd just love to share a few insights on impact. One of the biggest challenges we had when we were starting Taking It Global is a lot of the funders who we approached said, well, how is this any different than just taking these resources and reading them in a book? How does the fact that this is happening online in the community make a difference the way that this content is being consumed? So over the last 7 years, and we're just about to enter our 8th year, we've done a longitudinal study looking at the impacts and outcomes of our programs on the offline behavior that young people experience. And I'm hoping that within a few months we'll have even more updated data from the last 2 years. What we found is that 2/3 of students and young people reported that they increased their volunteer activity after being part of some of the programs and resources that I shared. 89% increased their cultural awareness. And I don't think that's surprising. In fact, this year we were honored to win an award from the United Nations and BMW called the Intercultural Innovation Award. And that award inspired a program called Culture Connect, which is almost like Instagram, using Instagram to facilitate learning experiences that help to build intercultural awareness and dialogue. And in fact, that inspired the launch of another HP Catalyst course that's just launched this month by my co-founder, Jennifer Corriero, which is looking at how you can bring intercultural dialogue and awareness into your classrooms. That's another free MOOC that you can take, and I'll paste the link afterwards. We have a few minutes for questions. 68% talk about gaining or refining skills, and we have a whole collection of different skills that they shared that they felt like they had built or refined through some of our online programs. 1 and 2 formed a friendship. And I think this is really important because books like Boys Adrift by Dr. Leonard Sachs talk about the lack of positive peer role models as one of the biggest factors that he says are kind of fueling this epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men. That's the cover of his book. And I think that social networks like Facebook aren't really the place for meeting new people. Most people don't accept friend requests from people they don't already know. But we're trying to create safe opportunities for students to connect and collaborate around learning. And a great example of that is Global Partners Junior. It's a program run by the City of New York, connecting middle school students in about a dozen schools in New York City with almost 30 cities around the world. And we're proud to host that program and help to facilitate it through our platform. 82% are talking more about local and global issues. And so we're excited because a lot of people say, students don't care about what's happening in the world today. I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that they do, and there's an amazing community out there to help them connect even more to it. I think it's just how we present that information to them and how we give them an opportunity to co-create their learning experience in a way that connects to those issues. That's will really be the driver of both student engagement and action, we think, on these challenges and on these issues. 45% say they've actually collaborated in some way with another person through the community, and 27%, more than 1 in 4, have actually started some sort of project in their school, in their community, maybe even in their country and the world through a program like Sprout, or maybe even a classroom project using the Guide to Action. So that for us is the biggest success, to know that there's these little bubbles of action that are all being connected and adding up to much more. So I wanted to leave at least 10 minutes for questions and dialogue. I'd love to hear from you. But I wanted to close with this question, which is what we wonder every day when we walk into our offices and do this work to help and support educators and young people around the world. And I hope, and I know most of you are wondering the same thing, and that's why you've chosen this profession and are investing in cultivating the next generation of students as leaders. And that's what I think we all wonder. If young people were actively engaged in all aspects of society and thought of themselves as community leaders, problem solvers, role models, mentors, and key stakeholders, how would the world change? And we were lucky to have Starbucks here. My co-founder shared that quote and included it on their cup a few years ago, and it was a really unique way to raise awareness about our work. So thanks so much for tuning in and listening today, and I'm excited to hear some of your questions over the next few minutes.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for being part of this today. You can probably hear my son in the background playing Minecraft. Henry, can you turn that down? Anyway, I wish Henry had been here earlier. He just walked in to hear your story about what you were doing with Commodores way back when, because I think Minecraft is the modern version of that.
Minecraft?
Minecraft. Anyway, any questions for Michael? Anybody want to? Anybody has something for him that they want to say? Please put it in the chat, or I can give you the mic.
And I also have the link here I'm going to paste in for the course, Facilitating Intercultural Digital Exchanges, which is the MOOC that Jennifer has launched. And I'll also pull up the Deforest Action MOOC from Chris Gauthier. So those are great opportunities for extending learning in those areas in particular and getting involved in some of these programs.
I do have a question because I saw that you were up in the tundra with Polar Bears International. I know that's not what you're talking about here, but can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing? And we have another keynote, Julian Reed, who's in the room, who's going to be talking about her work with Polar Bears International this week as well. But can you tell us about specifically what you were doing a little bit with them? And that partnership came about.
Sure, definitely. So we were running a program called Tundra Connections, which Julene was actually the coordinator of, that brings together scientists, different climate scientists, with kind of facilitators in the education space to have a conversation both amongst themselves and globally around the issues related to climate change, polar bears, the kind of polar regions. And so for us, we really focused last week on action and on understanding how we could actually take action to address some of these issues. And in fact, the best part is, and I'm just pulling up the link right now, that all of the webcasts are recorded. And so for anyone that missed it, here's the link here. We've got a recording of one of the webcasts that I can share. And I think the most amazing part of it was that we were able to connect in with schools around the world and have questions from students. We had a video conference with 5 or 6 students last Thursday, and they got to see both polar bears roaming live outside the window, but also to hear from climate scientists about the urgency of some of these issues and taking action on them. And so we connected it with, here's the science and the evidence and the challenge, and here's all kinds of actions that you can take to make a difference in your classroom, in your school, and in your life. So in my mind, it was kind of a match made in heaven, and it was really thanks to Julene and Krista, the executive director, who I met through HP, that this has all happened. So I know it's Julene's brainchild, and I'd encourage all of you to attend the session to learn a bit more about the program.
Yeah, the head of PVI talked a couple years ago for the conference and turned the webcam out so we could see the polar bears. He did it with Lance Ruggie of Discovery, and it was amazing. So I can only imagine what your sessions were like.
We got lucky.
Yeah.
I see there's a question from Ryan who's asked about the use of games in education. Yeah, so Ryan, it really depends on the partnership. So with AT, for example, that one was designed through Global Kids. They worked with students in Brooklyn on kind of a participatory design process to build that game together. The majority of our games are created by us in-house, and I'm just pasting the URL here. It's takeWeb.org/games. We've got a number of games, including 2 new games on mental health issues. There's been a particular focus in partnership with our Dalhousie University on the East Coast. They've been doing a lot of work on youth mental health, and we have a teacher's guide on bringing those games and our whole mental health program into the classroom. We're also organizing a series of video conferences over the next month with the RCMP, our National Police Force, and we're looking at cyberbullying in general in one of those games. So we're definitely open to collaboration, and the other group we've partnered with in the past is Global Laurea, which runs kind of a curriculum program for game design in schools. So I'd encourage all of you to have a look at that program because they've got great resources in terms of designing games, and we would be happy to have any of the games that your students might create on any of these issues promoted on our game section. We're actually going to be relaunching our game section in the next week or two to feature games across the web by other NGOs and not just our own games.
Do we have any other questions for Michael while he's here? Oh, here's one. How can rural families in developing countries be involved with this platform? Great question.
That is a great question. One of the things we've really tried to do over the years is to make sure that access to our website is kind of there and accessible on low bandwidth platforms. I know that's a challenge, especially in some rural areas in developing countries around getting access to this information, access to dialogue. We've also been working on a few different projects that are really around customizing and making our information more accessible on mobile phones. As a first step, it's smartphone-based, but really moving towards SMS-based access to content and information, because we know that resources and computer access can be a challenge there. So I think for us, it's really about creating a two-way partnership and relationship with developing countries, not just an observation one. And a big part of our work is advocacy and trying to create support for educators in the developing world. One thing I didn't share that's probably relevant is both with our Future Friendly Schools program and the other area of work is that we've actually launched a professional development course on each of those 3 areas, on student voice, global citizenship, and environmental stewardship. And both for Future Friendly Schools and those PD courses, we offer scholarships to educators in the developing world, and especially in rural communities, to be part of both of those programs for free. So educators who can afford to pay in developed countries sponsor the completely free participation of any educator in a non-OECD developing country that can't pay. And that's true with both future-friendly schools. So we partner up schools that do pay with sister schools and also with educators individually. So if you take one of our courses and you pay the fee, it's about $250 for a graduate level course you can get credits for, we'll subsidize the participation of an educator in a developing country. So if you are connected to any networks of educators that would you think be interested in this kind of work, we'd love to get some of them involved in our upcoming courses, and I really want to build a true partnership. Al-Bashir, do you consider taking a global social enterprise? That's a great question. I think as a charity, we really do try to run in a way as a social enterprise in that we generate some of our own funding and support. As it stands, we're currently funded mainly by grants, both from companies, government agencies, and foundations. But we really are hoping that future-friendly schools, for example, and our educator PD will bring in support to sustain the programs themselves. So part of the goal of the Future-Friendly Schools program is for us to be able to provide a much higher level of support to the educators that contact us. Right now, we make that happen mostly through volunteers. So we get phone calls every day, people asking for help finding a school to partner with or using the platform. And right now, we provide all of that support free of charge. And we're hoping that through Future-Friendly Schools, we can create a network where schools will be members, and that will help to sustain us being able to do that. And also with the educator PD, that the funds we raise through that can both help us subsidize free participation in the developing world, but also will help to fund our other educational programs which aren't funded. So we have no core funding, no endowment. It's all generated through either project-based funding or through the small fees that people pay for keynotes, workshops, professional development, or the Future-Friendly School certification. And I'll just paste the link. Someone was asking, the link to the professional development overall is that link there, and there's a specific link to the e-courses. And an educator from a developing country, as soon as they pick a country that's a non-OECD considered developing country, they'll get an extra form where they can apply for a scholarship for a tuition-free.
I do want to add that there are going to be, I think there's at least one other or two other sessions by Michael's colleagues that are going to be given at this conference. One is on the deforestation project. So, Michael, do you know offhand which ones they are? I know Sarah's doing one. Somebody else is too.
Yep, there's 4 sessions. I'm also doing another session that'll be much more in-depth about the Future-Friendly School certification. It'll be some content from today, but also just going in specifically to how the certification works and the indicators, and just get feedback from the participants as well. So I'd love for you to join those other sessions. I think we have ones on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So there's at least one session every day. And Tanya Rashid is the other colleague of mine who's presenting as well. So I'd love for you to pop in and learn more at either of those sessions.
I think I'm going to wrap up because we're about to, we need to go on to the next sessions. But Michael, if you want to leave your contact information in the chat, that would be great. And I also want to point out that we're really grateful to have a partnership with TakingITGlobal. They've been really supportive of this conference over the past 4 years, and they always have a plethora of sessions during this time. And this is the kind of example that of other partnerships that we'd like to develop with groups who are doing similar work. So we'd love to promote and give a platform to groups that are doing things like Michael and TakingITGlobal. So thanks again, Michael, for everything. We really appreciate it. And this is fabulous, and we look forward to hearing from you more during the rest of the week.
Pleasure. Thanks, and congratulations to you and Steve for organizing such a great event and bringing everyone together to learn. So it's an honor to be a part of the first day, and I look forward to chatting with many of you throughout the week on other sessions. Bye from Toronto.